Thank you, Stephen. It's good to be here. I'm going to follow a PowerPoint here, starting with this very scary opening image of what looks like our planet on fire, which it kind of is right now, with at least one of many outcomes being that we have unleashed a plague of ticks and the diseases that they carry. So what I'm going to do is talk about the threat posed by ticks, but in two parts. First, you're going to hear how we abetted this. We had a great hand in making this happen. This is humankind's doing, what we've done to the planet. Then you're going to hear how we've responded to it. And we have not responded well. We have not managed this illness well. We have not worked assiduously enough to control ticks. And we are paying a great price. Many people, many patients are paying a great price. So when I was finishing up my book, I asked several people to look at it and maybe endorse it, and Jane Goodall endorsed it, and Bill McKibben endorsed it. But I think my favorite quote was from a Drexel University researcher, a very esteemed researcher who, by the way, more or less single-handedly solved the problem of inner ear infections in children. But what he said is, my book was as macabre as a Stephen King horror novel, except it's true. Ticks are basically blanketing the globe. Okay, so just for the basics, we know that ticks are in more places than they have ever been. And we have some archival data. We have old data in the scientific literature and new data. And this is just a little bit of it, basically showing what happened in Sweden in a relatively short period of time, from the early 80s to the early 90s. Those little white dots are where ticks were found. And you can see the ticks moving up the east coast of Sweden. Sweden being one of many countries where this is happening. So, from 1943 to 83, basically, ticks didn't pass that. The line of demarcation was the 66th parallel of longitude. That's where they stayed, of latitude, rather. By 2011, we had a scientist do some more studies. We found them at the 69th parallel. They had moved about 200 miles further north. Now, this is happening in Canada. Canada is a new frontier for Lyme disease. They are basically, the Canadians are, at the point where we were here in New York and in the Northeast and in the Midwest and other areas of the country, maybe 30 years ago. Doctors are all of a sudden seeing Lyme disease, or they're saying, we don't have Lyme disease here, and not treating when they should. There's that whole awareness cycle that is starting up there as numbers of cases grow. In the last year, up 100% in Canada. Then there's this. You even find, and this may be a comment more on how just adaptable ticks are than on climate change itself. There's a place called Verkhoyansk, Russia. It's above the Arctic Circle. It has the Guinness record for temperature extremes, about an extreme of 200 degrees from coldest to hottest on record. And there, a group of scientists went and decided to test the blood of some of the residents and found they were carrying the antibodies to Lyme disease. Maybe they weren't sick, they had been exposed. So we know that ticks are climbing latitudes. We see more cases in more places. We know we find ticks in more places. Well, they're doing something else. And here again, we have a very astute scientist who decided in 1957 to climb an Alp in what was then Czechoslovakia and is now Slovenia. And he finds, okay, ticks cannot survive above 700 meters of altitude, okay? 50 years later, another scientist goes back, bless his heart, because I like this kind of data, and he finds ticks living happily at 1,100 meters. So they're not just moving north, they're moving up. How are they doing this, you ask? Well, basically a tick, and especially the black-legged tick that we are very concerned about because it gives us Lyme disease, walks one way. It walks vertically. It climbs up a bit of grass, a twig of some sort, and it holds out its forelegs, and it just waits for a mammal to pass by. It, by the way, can smell your breath from 50 feet away. And that's when those little legs go out and they start waving, and hopefully they'll snag a bit of fur or a sock or what have you and climb on board. So they can't go far in and of themselves, even if they get on the back of a deer. You know, the deer stays in their geographical area for the most part. But what's happening is migratory birds are climbing latitudes, taking them further north, sometimes taking them further west, to more hospitable places, to places they didn't survive before. Now, this has been happening for a very long time, that birds would pick up ticks, you know, from the tip of Argentina in South America all the way up to the Yukon in the north. And they would pick them up in one place, drop them in another place. Well, a couple of things have happened. There are more ticks to be picked up, to hitch a ride on a passing bird. The other thing is, when that tick is picked up, say in Virginia, by a bird on the Atlantic flyway, and dropped maybe in Nova Scotia, that tick has a lot greater potential for survival. The conditions are right. It is not going to desiccate in the sun or freeze in the snow or what have you. It's also going to have a much greater chance of finding other ticks, of finding the love of its life, of making babies, 2,000 to 3,000 at a time, and propagating the species. So that's what happens. And this is happening in Europe. It's happening in many other places.